Welcome to the challenging business of sorting out ethical dilemmas in news work. We will go through an actual case so that you can see how journalists on a newspaper identified their moral dilemma, talked through possible actions, and then decided what to do. This exercise is designed to give you a model for thinking through other cases involving ethical conflicts. I also want you to observe a case in which moral decisions were made collectively by journalists and not imposed by a top-level manager or resolved simply by looking at the newsroom guidelines for ethical practices. Ethics is a demanding colleague for working journalists. She is only satisfied when minds are rigorously engaged. So let's engage with the challenge reporters and editors at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution faced when they discovered a man had been violently assaulting other men for more than 20 years, apparently without much interest from the police. Violent incidents are reported by most newspapers and often as well by television news staffs. By itself, this was a brief story handled by an experienced reporter, Richard Greer. The brief story, however, prompted a call from a source who suggested that violent assaults had been experienced by one group of men for more than 2 decades. That group included male prostitutes. Greer talked to several Atlanta gay men who were convinced that only one man was responsible for the attacks. Police detectives told Greer off the record that the suspicions were valid and that there was no active police investigation. Another officer told him that he had run into the handcuffed man while moonlighting as a security guard at a bar. The officer gave Greer the man's name and date of birth. To this point, Greer had simply practiced sound journalism by following up on leads he gained from several sources. But now he and his colleagues had arrived at an ethical turning point. They faced a dilemma. This slide addresses just one horn of the dilemma faced by the Atlanta journalists. They had a name, substantial reason to believe the named man was the attacker, and details from many victims. To reporter Greer, such evasions of the law and justice required that the public be informed. His investigation had moved very close to the truth about the handcuffed man. Whether a report provides a reasonable level of truth is a judgment based not on an absolute standard, but on professional experience and the immediate circumstances. But in the newsroom in Atlanta, the conversation moved to other moral implications of that choice. News conventions throughout the country discouraged such reports until the police had arrested in some cases or charged a suspect in other cases. The police action signifies to the public that there had been law enforcement investigation behind the apprehension and charge. In this case, the police were not actively investigating and perhaps never had. If the police make an arrest, it is their burden to provide the evidence related to the charge. Newspapers don't make arrests or file charges, and consequently often can't be required to fully support their claims. Colleagues at the paper urged Greer to proceed carefully. He had no official documents linking the suspect with the attacks. Other reporters, though, warned that there could be more violent assaults unless the paper revealed its findings. A story might discourage more incidents, at least for a time, and victims would have some warning that the attacker might still be active. This view is often voiced as a moral duty to prevent or minimize harm. And there was one other argument that greatly influenced the discussion. The paper had its own set of rules for news practices, and one of the rules explicitly declared that a person would not be named as a criminal suspect until he had been arrested or charged. How do you weigh the moral importance of obedience to the rules of your employment against the moral importance of attempting to help others avoid harm? I guess this is a 3-horned dilemma, or one needing 3 hands. In ethics theory, the doctrine or idea of the middle ground has been respected from the time of the Greek philosopher Aristotle. The third possible action reflects that view of avoiding the extremes of reckless naming of someone without substantial evidence, or suppressing information that could benefit the public. The history of the assaults can be reported truthfully, even without the name of the perpetrator, and the story by itself would serve to warn possible victims, as well as prompt the police to begin an inquiry. The paper staff chose this alternative, working in the middle ground. The story provided more first-person accounts of assaults, and the police did suddenly go public with a promise for a full investigation. Greer went to the courthouse in search of documents. In his words, "I hit the jackpot." He had found in archives more than 400 pages of documents connecting Robert Lee Bennett to the sadistic assaults. A recent victim picked Atlanta attorney Bennett from a photo lineup. Now the name could be published? No. The newsroom rightly recognized it still had an unresolved dilemma. I can imagine that a raucous debate filled the Atlanta newsroom as the journalists edged closer to a fully developed, truthful story about serial crimes that the police had mostly overlooked. The dilemma remained on the table, a choice between naming and not naming Robert Lee Bennett in an article that tied him to a long series of violent attacks. As the discussion evolved, it matched conversations familiar in journalism and in so many other activities. Values treasured by individuals entered the debate, became part of the larger ethics system that ultimately guided the staff to its decision. Greer stayed close to his sense of the duty journalists have to reveal important truths to the public, but as he told me, he was also influenced by a lifelong concern for those who are marginalized or treated unfairly by our systems. Most of the victims were male prostitutes, an identity that might lead some to consider their plight unimportant, but not to Greer, who also saw the victims as members of the underclass, a group that regularly lost out on the benefits and services of the community. Other values were hashed and rehashed in the debates, including a wide spectrum of views about police. Every value had its proponent and its challengers. The Bennett case unfolded rapidly. A day after the newspaper story appeared, Tampa, Florida police contacted Atlanta police about an ugly attack there. A man had been set on fire and suffered amputation of both of his legs. Bennett was charged with the assaults and convicted in both Atlanta and Tampa and sentenced to concurrent lengthy prison sentences. He died in prison in 1998. Dilemmas move us to decisive action. Some say the stress dilemmas cause encourages us to find creative resolutions. A good dilemma makes claims on our ethical systems even after the decision. Greer made that clear in an account of the case he wrote for Fine Line, a journalism ethics publication, in 1991. This last slide illustrates the positive value of the staff reflection on what it might have done better. It's good to ask whenever a news organization points its fingers with alarm at some failure in government or society, if the journalists have honored the values they claim have been violated. I hope this close look at a single case has shown you the importance of deliberate study of the facts and history in a dilemma situation, as well as attention to the values at play among those making the decision, as well as those they serve. Then, after a decision is made and put into effect, the decision maker should study its outcome in preparation for the next dilemma.